Hello and welcome. You're watching Head to Head. I'm Antonina Antosha with UATV. A Russian court has extended the arrest of 10 Crimean Tatars until November 15th. Their hearing was held behind closed doors. Just to remind you, on March 27th, the Russian FSB detained 20 Crimean Tatars. They are suspected of being part of the Hizb ut-Tahrir organization, which is banned in Russia. To talk more about this, we're joined in the studio today by Denis Savchenko. He's the deputy director of the NGO Crimea SOS. Hello and thank you for joining.
Hello.
So as I have just mentioned, the Russian court has extended the arrest of 10 Crimean Tatars until November 15th, and they are suspected of being a part of Hizb ut-Tahrir organization that is banned in Russia and considered to be a terrorist organization in Russia. The Kremlin usually uses this narrative, calling Hizb ut-Tahrir a terrorist organization and accusing Crimean Tatars of being a part of it. Can Crimean Tatar community withstand it somehow?
Well, this is very difficult because the persecution of Crimean Tatars within the Hizb ut-Tahrir case is just a part of the systematic persecution policy of persecution of different categories of people, and no matter what are your religious beliefs, what is your sexual orientation, what is your social and political views, the Russian Federation creates the system when you can be persecuted as default, and therefore it is very important to provide information outside of the Russian Federation, which is under total control of Kremlin within the informational policy and legislative policy, because as of now all the citizens of Russian Federation, including citizens of Ukraine that are residing on the temporarily occupied Crimea, they are all the hostages of these criminal authorities.
Is there any official information on exact number of how many Crimean Tatars are currently being illegally held behind bars in the Russian Federation?
When we are talking about the Hizb ut-Tahrir case, it is
overall.
Yeah, I'll talk about it a little later. So 65 Crimean Tatars are being persecuted under Hizb ut-Tahrir case. The overall number of politically motivated administrative or criminal cases is 146, and 97 of them are related to persecution of Crimean Tatars. Overall, 115 persons are being illegally detained in prisons or pre-trial facilities, but there is we do not possess the breakdown which are Crimean Tatars and which are not Crimean Tatars. And the overall, if we are talking about persecution, different forms of persecution, we are talking about thousands of people.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Even though we're talking about thousands of people, there are names that are heard loud and clear, and one of them is Edem Bekirov. According to his lawyer, his health is extremely deteriorating all the time. Is there any new information on in what state is Edem Bekirov's health right now?
Well, the last few updates were that it was very hard for him to get up from the bed in the prison cell, so he was almost immovable. Because of this, his attorney Alexei Ladin recently, just like yesterday or the day before yesterday, he informed that he provided information that he couldn't meet with Edem Bekirov in the prison because Mr. Bekirov couldn't get up and go to the premises where the meetings with attorneys are conducted, and this is this is one update, and the other update is that previously Edem Bekirov informed that he is ready to start a hunger strike, which is equal to death sentence to him, because considering the health problems with health that he had before he was in prison, diabetes, amputation, problems with heart, and absence of appropriate medical care at the time when he stayed in the prison. So this all leads to not very positive conclusions.
Besides trying to get the information as far as possible outside the annexed Crimea about the severe human rights violations that are being committed against the Crimean Tatar community. What else could be done to help those that are illegally imprisoned right now in Russia and other Crimean Tatars that are living under constant threat of being persecuted? And here, I mean, maybe there is a formula that would unite Crimean Tatar community, civil society of Ukraine, and the government.
Yeah, well, this is not an easy question. Of course, if we had a clear answer to it, maybe the execution of this plan could be much more effective. But talking about the overall situation, of course, what we see now in Ukraine is lack of the strategy on how to overcome negative consequences of the temporary occupation, how to deoccupy Crimea, and how to reintegrate it into the Ukraine after it is deoccupied. And the provision of assistance to Crimean Tatars, to other victims of human rights violations after the start of occupation is a very important part of it, of this plan, should be. Of course, now Ukraine is on the verge of very serious political transformations. We see the new president, the new parliament, and we hear news that the strategies on the occupation of Crimea and the separate strategy on Donetsk and Lugansk regions are to be adopted, and different committees and other bodies are to be established to implement all this. But we could analyze and somehow observe the results of these initiatives only after the September 2019. Talking about the general overview of the situation, of course we need a strategy, and we need Ukrainian government to be much more active on adopting appropriate decisions, adopting laws, implementing in practice these laws. For example, the law on the legal status of political prisoners that passed the first hearing in the parliament and now waits the second voting. The law on persons that became the victims of enforced disappearances, that was enacted in 2018, a year ago, but still haven't been enacted in practice. So there are many questions related to the situation in Crimea that could be resolved here by the government of Ukraine jointly with the representatives of civil society. Talking about Crimean Tatars and other activists, other pro-Ukrainian persons who reside permanently on the territory of Crimea, the situation there is very different. Every act of communication between government-controlled and non-government-controlled territories, every act of provision of assistance brings very serious risks to these people, because they can be persecuted by the occupational authorities. So we have to be very careful in how we try to provide assistance to these people. But the core, the main key, the main instrument to establishing a good cooperation is, of course, constant communication. We have to hear what they say, we have to hear what they need, and not to draw up our own image of how we should provide assistance and what assistance should be provided, but we have to hear from them what they need.
What are the future plans for the NGO Crimea SOS, let's say in about next 2-3 years?
Well, we have the projects of holistic provision of assistance to residents of Crimea, including separate categories such as activists, including lawyers and civil journalists. So we continue to provide direct assistance to conflict-affected population. We continue to conduct advocacy interventions to raise the topic of Crimea on a national and international level, because this is the constant threat for all the civil society, that the topic of Crimea, the topic of internally displaced persons, and all the other related topics, they can just be out of focus of international community as well as national community, mass media, and correspondingly the government of Ukraine. So this is the one of the most important issues that we try to attack, and of course to maintain provision of assistance to conflict-affected population. Meanwhile, we try to somehow assist in developing of civic society and strengthening capacity of civil society here on government-controlled areas, because we really need civil society community to be strong and to have this feature of diversity, so different organizations could provide very specific kind of assistance to conflict-affected population and to other actors involved in this process. And of course, transferring this information, and what is more important again, maintaining the connection between the occupied peninsula and the government-controlled territories, because as the conflict is protracted and these connections are being ruined, and without them we couldn't even obtain the actual information about what is the situation, what assistance is required, and what are our next follow-up steps.
Thank you so much for coming here, and thank you so much for this conversation. That was Denis Savchenko. He is a Deputy Director of the NGO Crimea SOS. Thank you so much for watching UATV. Stay tuned for more.